All right, Bram. Thanks for coming on the show, brother. I wanted to start. Where do you stand on this Bitcoin versus MicroStrategy debate? Because I see a lot of people super like MicroStrategy pilled. That's the way. And then I see other people. It seems some of the maxis are a little salty. Maybe they missed out on some of the MicroStrategy gains. So where do you stand on all of this?
Start mining Bitcoin today at marketplace.blockwaresolutions.com.
Yeah, so excellent question because I think I MicroStrategy built myself this week, which took me 4 years. So are we early? I don't think so, but I think what got me there. So I think first off, I'm a pure Bitcoin maximalist. Okay, I did not sell any Bitcoin to get into MicroStrategy. I think that would be a very dumb thing to do, but. And props to Ben Workman, one of the kit analysts, quant bros or something. I don't know what they call themselves on the on X, but I've been watching Saylor and hearing about what he's doing, but I never really dove into it. And I watched his presentation that went kind of viral this week. I think it has almost 1 million views now at Cantor Fitzgerald. And when he said, I'm refining fiat money into Bitcoin, like Standard Oil refines oil into like kerosene and gasoline and like all these different things, I thought, okay, that is pretty interesting, because I remember a quote from him way back where he talks about, Bitcoin is this thing in cyberspace. It's like Manhattan in cyberspace, right? And if you knew that Manhattan was going to be New York City, then you would have wanted to buy Manhattan. And then later on, you figure out what you do with it, right? And I kind of like combined those two things. And then I thought, okay, so he's a Bitcoin maxi like us. He has an idea of where this is going. He thinks, okay, I need to get as much of this as possible. And I think he found a lever through which he can do that. And that is why I think it's so genius and how it clicked for me. Apparently, I learned there are trillions of dollars in the world that find a place to get yield. And they don't buy stocks, they don't buy commodities, etc. But they're looking for debt instruments, for bonds, basically. And apparently, MicroStrategy is able to offer such attractive bonds that they are basically oversubscribed every time. And what he does is then he buys Bitcoin with it. So eventually, I think the short summary for me is he's building the world's central Bitcoin bank. And through his custom-made financial products that he, puts up from time to time, and he has different ways to raise capital. He also has this ATM, right, where he can offer his shares in a quick and efficient way. But I think that's a secondary thing. The thing that I really got is like, he's just sucking up all the fiat money that's looking for a place to get yield. These people that have this money and are looking for the yield don't really care that it's MicroStrategy or he buys Bitcoin or whatever. They just buy the financial product. And that is how he's refining fiat money and turning it into Bitcoin. And I think it's actually a good thing. Obviously, I would say before you get MicroStrategy, you should have Bitcoin in self-custody, okay? But it's another way of just sucking liquidity out of fiat and storing it in Bitcoin. What is he going to do with that in the future? I think the answer is to TBD, right? Like when you bought Manhattan, you didn't know that it was going to be New York City. But my concept of it is that he's building a bank, and it's going to be the Bitcoin reserve bank of the world, basically. So where I stand, I mean, I sold all my other stocks, I sold all my minor stocks, and I just really went into this because I think it is very interesting and also very profitable over time. So I think it's just a really interesting development, and it's also fascinating. I mean, you start with this question, right? Like, why it feels like this week a lot of people figure this out in some way. Like this conversation is boiling to the top, and well, you just mentioned before we started, we see all these other companies. We have Seminar Scientific, we have MetaPlanet, etc. Like these are already quite known, but we saw the Rumble CEO tweet about like, should I add Bitcoin to the balance sheet? And Saylor replied, maybe he watched Saylor on Patrick Bet-David's podcast. I don't know, but something is brewing in a sense that people are waking up to this model of just raising cheap. Saylor had 1.75 billion for 0%. That's wild. So
right,
yeah.
I think I'm in a very similar spot as you. That's kind of how my journey has been. It's really been the last, I'd say, week or 2 weeks where it clicked. Like MicroStrategy on my mind was always, oh yeah, it's a levered Bitcoin equity. That makes sense. When Bitcoin goes up, it might go up more. But now I'm seeing it through that same lens where we've had this kind of hypothetical world in our mind where TradFi collides with the Bitcoin world, but we never really had an idea of what that would look like. And that's MicroStrategy. Because like Saylor says, there's a lot of institutional investors. They can't buy spot Bitcoin. Some of them can't even buy like equity or the ETF. They can only buy corporate bonds. How do these investors get Bitcoin exposure? It's through MicroStrategy, right? They are willing to lend MicroStrategy money at basically 0% interest when they could buy US Treasuries, get a risk-free 4 or 5% because of that embedded call option. And so over the long term, and even like right now, this is how it works, is like regardless of what direction you want Bitcoin exposure, whether long or short, whether you want that through options, through spot equity, or through corporate bonds, MicroStrategy is the vehicle to do that. So this is really the bridge between TradFi and Bitcoin. It seems like, the ETF is kind of that in a way too, but MicroStrategy is just that, but more volatile and more upside potential. So to me, I'm really like, I would never sell any of my spot Bitcoin. I definitely agree. Like that is savings. You need cold storage Bitcoin because nobody can take it from you. You can take it anywhere in the world. But, some of my passive flows might start going into MicroStrategy as well. I mean, it's just too much opportunity there, I think, to kind of totally gloss over.
Yeah. And two things to add. Again, Ben Workman he really got me over the line. At one point, he mentioned this is a business model pivot. Okay, so what you said is how I looked at it too, right? Oh, they have this business intelligence software or something. I don't even know what the software is that they make, right? Okay, he had this cash problem, right? 500 billion, and he just started buying. And my perception until last week ago that this was, there were like debt instruments, but I didn't really, again, I didn't really dive into this. But once I heard Ben say, okay, this is a business model pivot, right? So Michael Saylor says we are a Bitcoin treasury company. Okay, this is the only company that has all of their value basically in Bitcoin, and he's not selling it because that is the entire core of this new business model. Is that everything that he offers is backed by a hard asset? And when I heard Ben say business model pivot, I also had to think about Saylor interview a long time ago, is where he said like where, part of his origin story around Bitcoin is that he said, my business was basically, like a zombie business or a dead business. Like I had nowhere to go. My stock was like $9 or $6, whatever. So I had a few options. One of them was to retire, and the other one was to take risk. And so again, when I heard business model pivot, for me, those really were the words. I thought like, this is what he means with that, right? So he's gonna move away from this software business, or maybe that's going to be a little part, I don't know, but the main business model of this business, and I tweeted it like this, and it got some good resonance, is MicroStrategy basically built a bridge to help traditional institutions refine their capital and turn it into, you can call it shares of Bitcoin, eventually, like oil into gasoline. So it's tailor-made financial products to get trillions of capital into Bitcoin. That's
it. Yeah, it's funny too, where people who are like MicroStrategy fudsters are trying to dunk on it, saying, "Oh, your business is so dead. Like all you can do is just buy Bitcoin." And it's like he literally said this 4 years ago.
Yeah.
That's exactly the point.
It's another business,
right?
So once you understand that it's going to be another business, again, that's when it clicked for me. Like it's just he's moving to a totally different thing. He just saw an opportunity and he's capitalizing on it.
Do you think this becomes sort of a flywheel effect, or this accelerates if MicroStrategy gets included in one of the, like the NASDAQ or the S&P 500?
Well, as far as I understand it, that's based on a certain weight. I saw a calculation yesterday from someone who said they might have, based on where they are now, if they are included, get like 950 million in passive flows from being included. Yeah, that's basically free money for him.
Yeah.
And so also another thing that I find really fascinating is that the dilution of the shares doesn't really matter, because they came up with a new metric, which is Bitcoin per share. And as long as that is going up and you understand what Bitcoin is, well, then you want to own this share, basically.
Yeah, we saw, like you mentioned, Semler Scientific and MetaPlanet. They've already cloned that KPI, Bitcoin per share. I imagine long term, every company is going to be looking at that, right? Because Bitcoin is the opportunity cost of giving any company capital, and so if they can't give you more Bitcoin per share, then they're not going to attract any inflows. I think this is kind of a precursor to, and this has to do with your article, so I think this is a good segue. Like the traditional bar, to so to speak, for any investment is the S&P 500 or US Treasuries, and now it's Bitcoin, right? It's this new measure of, all right, your company has to be more productive than 20% IRR Bitcoin, CAGR. It's just been historically 50%, but Saylor's thesis is it's going to drop down to 20%. So you have to be more productive than 20% growth per year. Otherwise, you're not going to get capital to invest. So can you talk a little bit about this idea of human productivity in Bitcoin, and your recent article, Bitcoin, the standard measurement for human productivity? Can you give us the high level summary of this?
Yeah. First, you just gave me a thought of that, right? So with what you said. So I say a lot, like in the fiat world, there's a lot of talk that has value or weight, depending on who says it, right? But even if there's no walk, it still gets valued, right? So people can talk, but they don't even have to walk the talk, basically. In Bitcoin, that is totally not possible, right? And it starts with, if I say I have 100 Bitcoin and you say, show me, and I say no, then it's bullshit, right? So everything in Bitcoin, if you think about Bitcoin as a base layer of the value of whatever, a person, a company, a product, a service, it is the hardest, most purest thing in which we can value something. So when you just mentioned companies getting Bitcoin on their balance sheet, for example, well, if you say I have 100 Bitcoin on my balance sheet, you have to prove it. There's no bullshit, right? And in fiat money accounting, there's a lot of cooking the books, basically, right? So you can also fake your growth, or you can have like nominal growth, but not real growth in your company. So I love the idea of, when you add Bitcoin, usually out of greed, that eventually you will get like a call option. There's like a call on your greed, like, show me what you say is your situation, or whatever you're communicating in information. I just love that thought, because that is also part of like the Trojan horse, in a sense, that people adopt Bitcoin because number go up and the greed, but the values and the principles of Bitcoin are enforced on you when you adopt it, whether you know it or not. But at a certain point in space and time, you will get confronted with that fact, and you will have to align with that. So I just, you just gave me that thought. So I think that's interesting. So I'd love more companies to adopt Bitcoin. Then I think there will be real competition. So
right,
yeah,
it's
no, go ahead. I'll take the second one.
It's just proof of work, right? It's like, I saw Stephen Lubka tweet like a week or so ago, is kind of satirical. When people say, oh, Bitcoin has no use case, it's like, okay, you just admitted you provide no value to society and you have no value to store, right? It's yes. You have to have some kind of value to store. And so you can want Bitcoin for number go up, but if you're not contributing to the world, if you're not consuming less than you produce, you're going to have no value to put into Bitcoin to benefit from it.
Yes, 100%. So that's a good leeway into the paper, right? So I think a summary, I would start with, the our time in life is scarce for everyone, right? So we don't know how much time we have. So it's limited to a degree because we know that we are going to die. And we also have limited energy, therefore, right? Energy expended in a limited amount of time. And that is our productivity, how much we can do in a set amount of time, let's say in a day's work. So when we expend our finite time, our finite energy in finite time, but we get rewarded with something, fiat money, that can be created infinitely by a group of people that doesn't care about your individual finite life, then you are trading something finite, your most precious asset, for something that can be created infinitely, which is probably the dumbest trade that you could ever make. Once you realize that and you think, okay, so what should be the reward for my most finite asset that I'm turning into work, basically, or I'm turning into certain value that I get rewarded for? Well, so in the paper, I argue that is Bitcoin, because as our time is limited, Bitcoin is also limited. So it would only be fair to have, limited input or limited offer is a limited reward, basically. And I say offer because anything that anyone offers, right, a product or a service, or just in general, if you look around you right now when you're listening or watching, anything you see costs energy to create or maintain. And so it's the same with, it's created or maintained by something or someone, eventually created by a human again, right? And so we should reward that with something finite. That's basically the premise of the paper. And then I go into, we say time is money, but money should also be time, right? But you and I both know if you save 10,000 units and you have that today, $10,000, for example. And this I got from Seb Bunny. It was a really good quote from him. He said, all the money you have right now is worth the most right now. And so towards the future, you know that it will become less valuable. It's debased on purpose, right? It's programmed. So if I have an offer, I have a value proposition, right? I say with my product or service, I deliver this. And you have a problem that could be fulfilled with the proposition, the value that I'm bringing to you. Then you could come to me and be like, hey, you priced that at $1,000 units. I would buy that for you for 900. And then I say, well, 950 I would be okay with, and that's where we negotiate about pricing the value that I am proposing to you and that you are perceiving from my proposition, basically. And when you say, okay, 950 is good, and we shake hands, at that moment in time, and only at that moment in time, we are equal. We have freely decided to match the reward with the offer that I propose to you, right? But when I deliver that, when I expend my energy in the limited amount of time, and you give me the infinitely creatable reward, and I walk away, I go home. When I am home, it's already worth less, right? In real terms, maybe a few cents, right? But let's say I want to stack dollars. I want to stack 100,000 because I want to buy a house. Maybe that takes me 5 years or 10 years, whatever, certain amount of time towards the future. But if those units, I can accrue more units, but if the value of those units gets debased, then basically my time and energy that I spent doing something for you is slowly stolen from me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the main thing that people should realize, is that is not a concept, that is actually real. And once you realize that, and you realize that you're trading your most finite asset for something that's created infinitely, I think only then we can start moving towards, okay, why should it be Bitcoin, right? I think when we talk about orange pilling or educating people on Bitcoin, we talk a lot about Bitcoin itself, but I think we should talk more about the problem that everyone has.
Yeah, I definitely agree. If you don't know the problem, then the solution doesn't really make a lot of sense. And yeah, why would you trade your only scarce asset, which is time, not counting Bitcoin, your only scarce asset for an asset that they just print with strokes of a keyboard? It doesn't really make sense. And I'm picturing this almost panic-like scenario, right? Where we trade goods and services, I get dollars, and like I have to go spend these or they're going to lose value. It creates this weird dynamic where like I need to spend, and everybody knows, you know, when you make decisions under pressure or with haste, you're going to make poorer decisions than if you have time to diligently plot and think. And that's kind of what saving does, right? And I guess this would be the core of Saifedean's argument about time preference. It's like when your money's going to lose value, you're going to make worse decisions simply because you're under pressure, versus when you can save in Bitcoin, you can actually think long-term and make more long-term focused decisions.
Yeah. And I think that's easy to say now because we got Bitcoin and now we're looking back at our previous behavior, right? Because we finally understand that thing that we hold is the scarcest asset in the world. So we are very critical towards any urge that we have to spend it, right? Or spend our fiat money. And then, you know, having more Bitcoin is that hurdle rate. So I don't think a lot of people are consciously being a consumer, right? But it's more about that the entire system around us is gearing us towards, you know, you should spend the money. I mean, even the known economists, I do air quotes because they say, well, a little bit inflation is good. It you know, people will spend their money, blah, blah. You know, I don't have an economics background, but that's the dumbest thing I've almost ever heard. I think
I do have an economics background, and I agree. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Yeah.
So what a few things to add. So if you know that your reward is inferior to your input or output for that reward, right? Your finite time and energy, you are not incentivized to do the best that you could do. Because if the reward is not the best reward to ever exist, then, well, your work is not going to be the best work that you ever produced. But let's say I have an offer, you have an offer, and another person has an. Well, let's say you want to do something on your house, right? And you put out a tender or whatever, and there's 4 people that come with an offer. There's one guy that asks Bitcoin, and there's 4 that ask dollars. You know, as a Bitcoiner, that the guy that asks for Bitcoin knows how much value, real value, he has to deliver before you will part ways with whatever chunk of your stack. Does that make sense? Because I think within adopting Bitcoin, again, there's these principles and kind of like values as to literally how high you value the asset, that even without talking, you and I, you know, or you and the guy that offers or asks Bitcoin, you already have a certain level of agreement on the value of that reward. And you know that he will do his best. He's incentivized, at least, to do his best work, or else he will never get that reward. And so I think we will slowly move towards a time where, you know, products and services are going to be based in like a fiat denominated price and a Bitcoin denominated price. And yesterday I had a conversation for my podcast where my guest told me that in some countries, for example, in the Caribbean, you have like the Caribbean dollar. Like in stores, you have like a Caribbean dollar price and a US dollar price. So you can pay with US dollar, but your change is in Caribbean dollars. So the stores kind of like wash the bad currency for the good currency, which is literally what Michael Saylor is doing at a crazy scale. So I like these little analogies because you already see the human behavior. Well, it's already happening in different contexts with different subjects. But when we talk about Bitcoin, you know, once we realize it's the best reward for a finite time, then why would you ask anything else?
Right. I wonder, in the Caribbean store, is there a discount if you pay in Bitcoin? Because the merchant obviously would prefer, the dollars. Yeah.
I don't know, but I would assume, right? Because you want to incentivize people to spend the stronger currency. And I love that example. I just learned that, but I think it's just really, it makes a lot of sense. You know, it makes a lot of sense.
Bitcoin, I found you have to explain it with analogies, and a lot of them analogies and metaphors, because it is truly unlike anything else. It is a one of one. There's no apples to apples comparison. So to even understand Bitcoin, you have to pull from all different sorts of threads. Do you feel the same way?
Oh, 100%. I mean, when I just mentioned we have to talk about the problem first. If you ask someone, what is money, they were like, most people are like, what are you talking about? This is money. So I think just talking about what is money and then slowly talking about what the actual problem is. I mean, the entire sentence of, your time and energy gets stolen through the debasement of fiat currency, right? Nobody understands that. I understand, I understand it now, but like, that's not a good, that's a really harsh statement, actually. So I'm being
Right.
stolen from, you must be a crazy guy, that you're telling me that the government is stealing from me. So you have to make it tangible, right? Like you have to, that's why I start with, now I ask, what is your most pristine asset that you own? And then people start saying all these different things. And then I say, oh, but what about your time? Oh yeah, oh, my time. Oh, I never thought about my time. Okay, interesting. So that is literally where we have to start. And then slowly just take people on, visualizations, allegories, whatever you want to use. But I think once you realize that, well, you said you have an economics background. On my podcast, I talked to a guy who has like a double master's in economics. And he said, I never learned what money is. So, how do we expect regular people to know what money is and why one bill with a 10 on it is worth more than one with a 5 on it? Like, what is the reasoning behind that? And you really have to get to that nitty gritty, I do think, unfortunately, to kind of like conceptualize that, you're participating in a money system that is not designed to benefit your life, basically. That's the summary. And once you can get through that realization, which is, I think, not a nice realization, right? Only then you can really start thinking about, okay, how do I get out of this? What is my solution? What's the system that I should move to, right? And eventually I kind of see it like that. People can vote with their money. You can just basically vote, which is adopt another money and leave the money that's not working for you. That's basically how we all move out of here. But there's bigger money than just, the regular people's money. And I think, again, to go back to where we started, is this is the portal that is MicroStrategy, right? Like they are making it so attractive for people to be greedy in the fiat world that they unknowingly, for a lot of people that get these bonds from MicroStrategy, help establish this other money system, which is poetry almost, right? So I love that.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Probably the most common pushback I hear from no coiners is, I'm too late to Bitcoin. I missed the boat. Why is that not true?
I think that would be a great ender for this conversation, but it's also the ender for the paper, because I finished the paper with, if you commit to staying productive for your entire life, then you are never ever too late to Bitcoin. Because then, if you deliver real value in the real world or in the digital world, it doesn't really matter. Like if you deliver real value, then there will always be someone that, wants to reward you in this best money. But it's going to be a hard environment. It's going to be real free market competition. And I use the example of, like, let's say I start Bram's cookie store and I do that for 6 months and nobody buys my cookies because they suck. Again, not a nice personal realization. That's not a nice thing to experience. But I'd say it's also a good thing, because if it's clear you suck at, making cookies, why would you spend your finite time on trying to make build a cookie store? So I think here we get back to a system where people can try stuff, they can take risk towards the future, because they know that the money that they accrued, the capital that they accrued, will not lose value towards the future, which is Bitcoin. So it actually lowers your uncertainty towards the future, which allows you to try stuff, but it also allows you to fail at what you tried and then not have very bad consequences, because whatever you saved still has the same or more value. So I think we will actually get to a very competitive kind of like economy where a lot of stuff happens and a lot of people are trying to find their place in the world and their role and their literally their role in, how do I add value in this world. So I think it's actually a very positive outlook on the future, where we are all incentivized to really do our proof of work, whatever that is.
Yeah, that was well said. I think that's one of the main problems of the fiat system is failure is not allowed, right? If you think logically, businesses going under in the real world would be a good thing, right? It means they weren't producing enough value that society needed, right? But this whole concept of businesses being too big to fail and the money printer just backstopping them, it goes against like what would otherwise happen in the free market. And so under a Bitcoin standard, people are going to fail and then they're going to move to more productive endeavors.
Couldn't agree more.
So I want to end with what's your base case with 2025, right? Is Bitcoin going to $1 million? We getting that Omega candle, or what do you think is going to happen?
Oh yeah, I love that talk. I'm not a price guy, so I really whatever comes out of my mouth, I wouldn't know. But so I'm not going to say a price, but what I can say, I am really convinced that there is a certain inflection point with regards to adoption, which for me is also a certain type of understanding. I mean, you're also a HODL wave person, right? We see that go up. Once you understand what this is, you sell it for what? Your hurdle rate is in infinity. So once you really understand this, you will not sell this. Maybe you sell something to, upgrade your fiat life. That's fine. Everyone has a number. I agree with that. But, again, if you stay productive and you stay stacking sats, that is creating more certainty towards your future, which is, I think, almost one of the highest attainable things that you could do as a human, because our future is very uncertain, right? So I think there will be an inflection point in terms of where growing demand meets higher scarcity, so lower supply. I mean, that has to happen. I think that will happen in the next 2 years. I also think that if this strategic Bitcoin reserve really goes through, and I think it will, I also think they are in a hurry. Eventually, they have to be. And then I just think of Saif Dina Moose, who talks about, Bitcoin is gunpowder. You cannot afford, in this case, literally afford, to not buy Bitcoin, right? And if you had bows and arrows and swords, and you saw guys coming with rifles, you wouldn't be like, oh, is that rifle energy efficient? Boom, you're dead. There's no there's no talk, and you have to go. So even if you think like, oh, Bitcoin sucks and Bitcoin is a threat to my currency, in Europe, for example, I think they're asleep at the wheel. You have to move. You have to move. And actually, by the way, in Europe, you see people moving, people talking, presidential candidate in Poland talking about strategic Bitcoin reserve. In the DMs, I've been hearing something about Slovenia. So, it's moving along as projected.
Yeah. I think we're at that inflection point too. I mean, the literal government, the most powerful government in the world, the United States, is about to start stacking as much Bitcoin as they can. So the dominoes are starting to fall. I think, I don't know if you agree with this. I think the days of 50% plus 70% drawdowns, bear markets are over. I don't see that happening anymore.
Also a very good point. I agree. Minus 80%, I don't think that's going to happen. With a strategic Bitcoin reserve, I don't even know if there will be like a cycle like we've known, but not more than 50% drawdown. It's almost unimaginable. I mean, once you understand that you need to stack Bitcoin, and then you buy at any price, basically, just like Saylor. Also, maybe that's a nice kicker at the end, but I also think that once you adopt Bitcoin as a nation state, you have to adopt the mining too. You have to start mining with government resources. And I mean, we're 15 years in, but we are already at countries mining with government resources, right? We have Bhutan, we have Kenya, Ethiopia. I think there's something in the UAE, or is that Oman, I think, with Marathon has like $1 billion mining fee. So there are countries mining Bitcoin with government resources. So they have Bitcoin. I mean, they didn't really publish it, but they have Bitcoin. If you have a serious country like the US adopting Bitcoin, they have to mine. And why do they have to mine? Because they have to control a portion of the hash rate, so that eventually, when they start settling and transacting with other countries or whatever types of entities, they have to make sure that they have a share of the network, so they can make sure that the transactions that they want to go through actually go through. And so I think that's even a next level thing. But I think that the people that advise the new administration in the US understand this. So that's going to be very fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I agree. I think Trump's definitely got the right people in his ear, and he got a lot of flack for promoting crypto and conflating Bitcoin and crypto. And I was in that bucket too. I didn't like it, but you got to think this guy's he's what, 80 something years old, and he's just learning about it. It took me 6, 7, 8 months to actually distinguish between Bitcoin and crypto. So I think he's starting to get to that point, and definitely going to have some pro Bitcoin people in his administration. We're already starting to see those get announced. So super bullish on 2025. I think Bitcoin's definitely reached the point of no return. Bram, I appreciate you coming on the show. Where can we send the audience to keep up with what you're doing and check out your work?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the invite. So people can go to my X account, which is Bramk, Bramk. My pinned tweet is actually the paper that we mentioned, so people can check that out there. And you can also find my podcast, Bitcoin for Millennials, in a link on my profile. And recently I put a page live, which is startwithbitcoin.com, where people can find the 5 best videos that I recommend to watch after 10 years of studying this thing. So I hope that helps for some people. And I'm also going to build out that website. But if you follow me, you'll learn more about that.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it. Y'all go check that out. Links in the description.
Thank you.